There's no room for disappointments. That's what my mother said, right after she removed my chair from the Thanksgiving table. 23 relatives were seated, crystal glasses, perfect turkey, my sister glowing at the head of the table, and my name gone. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I walked to the end of the table and placed a certified copy of a court record in front of my father. One line. Just one line. The kind stamped by a county clerk, filed 32 years ago. By the time I finished reading it out loud, no one was hungry anymore. Because the real disappointment at that table was never me. And what that document proved didn't just end dinner. It ended a marriage. There's no room for disappointments. My mother didn't raise her voice when she said it. She didn't need to. The house was already full. Voices overlapped in the dining room, laughter bounced off polished walls. The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon drifted through the hallway. 23 place settings were arranged around the extended oak table. White plates, crystal glasses, gold-rimmed name cards placed carefully in front of each seat. Except mine. I stood near the doorway holding the pecan pie I'd made that morning, the same recipe my grandmother had taught me when I was 12. I counted again. 23. My mother adjusted a napkin near the centerpiece without looking at me. "We had to make space," she said calmly. Clarissa's announcement deserves focus. I waited for the rest of the sentence. It didn't come. "I don't see my seat," I said. She finally turned toward me. Her expression wasn't angry. It was worse than that. It was composed. "You'll eat later," she replied. "In the kitchen." After everyone is done. The room continued moving behind her. My sister stood at the far end of the table, one hand resting lightly on her very pregnant stomach. She wore cream silk. Soft lighting made her look almost staged. Perfect daughter, perfect announcement, perfect family moment. And me? Removed. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I placed the pie gently on the sideboard. "I'll help with drinks," I said. That earned me a small nod of approval, the kind you give staff who know their role. By the time everyone sat down, I was standing near the doorway between the kitchen and dining room, like always, close enough to serve. Far enough not to belong. My father stood at the head of the table and tapped his fork lightly against his glass. "Before we begin," he said, "I want to say how grateful I am." He thanked my mother first. Then Clarissa. Then the coming baby. He didn't look at me once. I had learned years ago not to expect it. The first time I noticed I was different, I was 8 years old. Clarissa had gotten a bike for her birthday, pink, with streamers. 2 weeks later, I got a used one from a neighbor. It was blue, scratched, one handle grip torn. My father had said it works just fine. That was the family definition of enough. It works, you're lucky. Don't ask for more. I carried plates in and out of the kitchen while conversation swelled. At one point, my aunt leaned toward my mother and whispered something that made both of them smile. I caught one word. Difficult. That word had followed me my whole life. Difficult child, difficult temperament, difficult personality. But I had never screamed, never broken anything, never rebelled. I got good grades. I dropped out of college when my mother got sick. I stayed home. I helped. I had been useful. Just never loved. Halfway through the meal, Clarissa stood slowly, hands braced against the table. "Mom and Dad," she said, glowing. "We wanted Thanksgiving to be special this year." She placed a small framed card in front of her. Handwritten in gold ink. "Baby Seton, Wells arriving this winter." Applause filled the room. My mother pressed her fingers to her mouth in delight. My father beamed. Someone popped open sparkling cider. I stood in the doorway holding a bowl of mashed potatoes. No one noticed I hadn't eaten. No one noticed I hadn't sat. That was the point. After the main course I carried in the pecan pie. It was warm. The crust golden. Grandma Ruth had taught me to braid the edges by hand. She always said dessert should look like effort. I murmured as I set it down. "We already have dessert," she said. "There's room," I replied gently. She looked at the table. Then at me. "You don't have a seat at this table," she said quietly but clearly enough for everyone to hear. Silence fell. 23 pairs of eyes turned toward us. "And there's no room for disappointments." The words settled in the center of the room like smoke. Disappointment, not failure, not mistake, just something less than hoped for. I felt something inside me shift, not snap, not explode, just shift. Like a lock turning slowly. For years I had believed something was wrong with me. That if I just tried harder, loved better, achieved more, I would earn my place. But standing there, watching my own chair removed and replaced with a decorative sign for an unborn child, I understood something. This wasn't about effort. It never had been. I walked toward the head of the table. My father watched me carefully now. He sensed something had changed. I reached into my coat pocket. My fingers brushed the folded document inside. Heavy paper, county seal, stamped and certified 2 weeks ago. I didn't pull it out. Instead, I looked at my mother. Why? I asked quietly. She blinked. Why what? Why have I always been the disappointment? A few relatives shifted uncomfortably. My mother inhaled slowly, preparing her practiced answer. Different. That word again. I nodded. And that's my fault. She hesitated. For a fraction of a second, I saw something flicker across her face. Not anger, not superiority, fear. My father cleared his throat. This isn't the time, Regina. It's been 32 years, I said softly. If not now, when? The room was silent. Even Clarissa looked unsettled. My mother straightened her shoulders. We can discuss this privately. No, I replied. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. I've been private my whole life. I stepped back from the table, and for the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt steady. The document in my pocket wasn't revenge. It was truth, certified, filed, stamped by a clerk who didn't know my name or my family politics. Just a record. One line. One sentence that explained everything. I looked at the empty space where my chair should have been. Then back at the room full of people who had watched my life like spectators. I won't interrupt dinner, I said. But I won't stand in the kitchen either. I picked up the pie. If there's no room for me at this table, then there's no room for my silence anymore. My mother's face drained of color. My father's knuckles tightened around his wine glass, and for the first time in 32 years, they looked afraid of losing control. Not of me. Of the truth. I walked toward the hallway. The document remained in my pocket, unopened, but no longer hidden. Behind me, I heard whispers begin soft, uneasy, the kind that spread fast. Dinner wasn't over, but something else was, and before the night ended, they would all understand why there had never been room for me. Because legally speaking, I was never meant to fit there at all. 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, I stood in line at the county vital records office holding a number ticket and pretending my hands weren't shaking. The building smelled like old paper and floor cleaner. Government beige walls, fluorescent lighting, a television mounted in the corner playing muted daytime news. People were there for ordinary reasons. Birth certificates for passports, marriage licenses, name corrections. I was there because of one sentence my grandmother had whispered to me 2 months before she died. You deserve proof, not suspicion. At the time I didn't understand what she meant. I do now. It started with a phone call from her attorney. Regina, Mr. Collins had said carefully, your grandmother left a sealed letter for you, not part of the will. Separate instruction. The will itself had been predictable. The house to my mother, investments split between my mother and Clarissa, personal items distributed politely. I received a small savings bond and my grandmother's handwritten recipe book. People noticed that. They always notice money. What they didn't notice was that my grandmother had never been careless. She had spent 40 years as a paralegal before she retired. She knew exactly how documentation worked. If she wanted something recorded properly, she knew how to do it. When I met Mr. Collins at his office, he handed me an envelope and one simple instruction. She asked you to verify before you react. Inside was not a dramatic confession. Not a DNA test in a lab envelope with red ink, just a typed letter. And a suggestion. The letter was dated 8 months before her death. Regina, if you are reading this, it means I didn't have the courage to confront Diane the way I should have. I do not know the full truth, but I have long suspected that the truth exists in public record. Start there. If you request a certified copy of your original birth filing, not the hospital souvenir copy, you may find what I could not obtain without legal standing. Do not accuse without proof. Do not reveal without verification. And whatever you learn, remember it is not a reflection of your worth. Love, Grandma Ruth. The difference between a birth certificate and a certified copy of the original filing is something most people never think about. But my grandmother had. A hospital gives you a decorative document. The county files the legal one, and amendments, changes made after filing, are recorded separately, sometimes corrections, sometimes legal acknowledgments, sometimes removals. At the counter, the clerk didn't look up when I stepped forward. UB 47, she typed. Reason for request. Personal record review. That part was true. She handed me a form. Full legal name, date of birth, mother's name, father's name. I paused at the last line. I wrote the name I had grown up with. Harold Seaton. I slid the paper back across the counter. The clerk reviewed it and nodded. Certified copy will include original filing plus any amendments. $22. $22. That's what it cost to potentially unravel 32 years. I paid. She stamped the request. Come back in 2 hours. I walked to a coffee shop across the street and sat by the window. I wasn't expecting fireworks. I wasn't expecting scandal. I was expecting clarity. For years, small inconsistencies had hovered in the background of my life. Medical forms that required blood type. My father always hesitated. Family photos. I looked like my mother, but never like him. Comments that felt unfinished. You're your mother's daughter. Never both. Always singular. At some point, suspicion stops being paranoia. It becomes pattern recognition. When I returned to the county office, the envelope was waiting behind the counter. Official seal, stamped certification, embossed county insignia. It looked ordinary. Government paper rarely looks dramatic. I took it home before opening it. I didn't want fluorescent lighting when my life shifted. At my kitchen table, I broke the seal carefully. The first page was the original filing from 1993. Mother Diane Elizabeth Seaton, Father Aldo Dallas and Alons blank. My breath stopped. There was no name listed, not even Harold's. The father line was empty on the original filing. Below it, in smaller print, was a note. Paternity acknowledgement filed 11 months post-birth. I turned the page. There it was. An amendment form dated nearly a year after I was born. Acknowledgement of Harold Seaton, voluntary declaration, no court order, no DNA, just signature-based acknowledgement. Meaning legally, he chose to become my father on paper. He was not listed at birth, he added himself later. I sat back slowly. The room felt quieter than it should have been. That one detail explained everything. If he had signed voluntarily months later, it meant doubt existed, it meant negotiation existed, it meant a conversation happened long before I could speak. I read the document again. There was another line beneath the acknowledgement. Previous paternity claim withdrawn prior to filing. Previous claim. Withdrawn. My hands went cold. There had been someone else. Someone who initially claimed paternity, and then stepped back, no name listed, just record of removal. My grandmother had been right, the truth had been sitting in public record the entire time, not hidden, just unrequested. I didn't cry. I didn't feel anger. I felt something much steadier, confirmation. For 32 years I had believed I was flawed, but legally speaking, I had entered this world under a question mark. My father wasn't my father at birth. He became my father by paperwork, which meant at some point, he had chosen to stay or been convinced to, or pressured. That was a different story. But the lie was structural. It wasn't imagined. It wasn't emotional exaggeration. It was documented. That night I called my grandmother's attorney. Mr. Collins. Did my grandmother ever request this record herself? A pause. Yes. And she was denied access to amendment history without next of kin status. She suspected there had been an alteration. My grandmother had known. Not everything, but enough. She didn't leave me money. She left me direction, which, I was beginning to understand, was far more dangerous. For 2 days, I sat with the information. I didn't call my mother. I didn't confront anyone. I read the documents. I researched voluntary acknowledgement laws from the early 90s. In that state, a man could sign acknowledgement without DNA testing. Once signed, it carried full legal parental responsibility. It could only be challenged within a limited time frame. After that, it became binding, meaning Harold had lived with that signature for 3 decades. And never once told me. The next question formed slowly: if there had been a previous claim withdrawn. Who withdrew it? The man? Or my mother? And why? That question didn't need immediate answering. But it deserved daylight. 3 days later, my mother called about Thanksgiving. Functional. Clarissa has an announcement. I expect you to behave. Behave. As if I had ever done anything else. That's when I made the decision. I requested a second certified copy. Not for me, for presentation. Embossed. Official. Because if I ever spoke, it would not be emotional accusation. It would be fact. Standing in the kitchen doorway at Thanksgiving, holding that document in my coat pocket, I wasn't seeking revenge. I wasn't trying to destroy my family. I was holding something much quieter. Proof that I had never been the mistake. Proof that the shame in that house had never belonged to me. When my mother said there was no room for disappointments, she had no idea she was sitting at a table built on one. And by the time I read that certified copy aloud, no one would be able to pretend otherwise. Harold knew, not everything, but enough. I saw it in the way he watched me across the dining room, not confused, not angry, calculating. As if he were trying to measure how much I knew, and how much time he had left before it surfaced. Dinner continued after my mother's comment. People resumed chewing. Forks scraped plates. But something had shifted, a small crack had formed in the air, and Harold felt it. 20 minutes later, he followed me into the study. The door clicked shut behind him. The room smelled like leather and old books. His space. His territory. "Regina," he said evenly, "you're making this uncomfortable." I didn't turn immediately. I was standing by the window, looking out at the dark yard where I used to play alone while Clarissa had friends over. I didn't remove my own chair. I replied calmly. His jaw tightened. "You're overreacting." "Am I?" Silence. He stepped closer. "Your mother has always been sensitive." That word again. Always redirecting back to her. I turned then. "Did you ever ask why?" His expression shifted. "Ask what?" "Why I was treated differently." "You were not treated differently." I let that sit between us. "No," I said softly. "Then why wasn't your name on my original birth filing?" The air left the room. He didn't answer immediately. His eyes flickered, not toward the door. Toward my coat pocket. He knew, not what I held exactly, but that I held something. "Where did you hear that?" He asked carefully. I didn't hear it. I held his gaze. I read it. The silence that followed was heavier than anything that had happened at the dinner table. His posture changed. Not defensive, resigned. For a moment he looked older than I had ever seen him. "How much did you read?" he asked. "'Nough." He moved toward the desk and sat down slowly, like a man lowering himself into consequence. "You went to the county." It wasn't a question. "Yes." He nodded once. A small acknowledgement. 32 years of silence, and now paperwork. "You weren't supposed to find out like this," he murmured. Was I supposed to find out at all? That landed. He rubbed his forehead. "I always thought if I kept things steady it would hold." "Hold what?" "The marriage." There it was. Not me. Not truth. The structure. He had chosen stability over clarity, and I had paid the price. "You signed 11 months after I was born," I said. "Yes!" "There was a previous claim." His jaw tightened again. "That was handled." "But who?" "Diane. My mother. Of course. What happened?" He hesitated then. "There was a man. From her office." The words were flat. Not explosive. Just fact. "She told me it meant nothing." "And you believed her?" "I chose to." "That was honest." "Brutally so." "You never questioned it again." He looked at me then. Actually looked at me. For years, every time I did, I saw the alternative: divorce, custody, public embarrassment. Clarissa caught in the middle. "And me?" His silence answered. "I wasn't in the calculation. Not equally." He stood up slowly. "You have to understand something?" "I'm listening." if you expose this publicly, you don't just hurt your mother. I don't intend to hurt anyone. Then what are you doing? Refusing to keep protecting a lie. That shifted him. This wasn't emotional chaos. This wasn't a tantrum. This was deliberate. You brought a copy tonight, didn't you? He asked. I didn't answer. But I didn't need to, he exhaled slowly. If you read that at the table, I haven't. Yet, the word hung between us. He moved closer. Not threatening, not aggressive, just urgent. Regina, once something like that is spoken in front of family, it can't be taken back. Neither can 32 years. He winced at that. I did what I thought was right. For who? Silence again, this time longer. I was afraid, he admitted quietly. There it is. Not anger, not pride. Fear. He had built an entire emotional architecture around avoiding humiliation. And I had been the quiet reinforcement beam. You suspected since I was little, didn't you? I asked. He looked away. Wes. How long? A few years. How many? He swallowed. Since you were 5. 5. Old enough to remember trying harder. Old enough to notice distance. You let me believe I was the problem. I thought I could love you anyway. But you didn't. That hit him harder than anything else. I tried. You tried not to look too closely. He didn't argue. Because he couldn't. Outside the study, I could hear laughter. Someone refilling wine. The dinner still pretending nothing had shifted. You think reading that paper will fix something? He asked quietly. No. Then why? Because I deserve to exist without being labeled the flaw. He nodded slowly. You're right. The word surprised me. You are. For the first time in my life, I saw something in his face that wasn't detachment. Real. Uncomfortable. I should have protected you, he said. Yes. I should have asked for truth instead of comfort. Less. He exhaled sharply. If you go through with this, your mother will fight. I know. She will deny. She will say the document is misinterpreted. It's certified. That stopped him. He understood what that meant. Stamped. Funargable, you planned this, he said quietly. No. I prepared. There's a difference. And he knew it. He walked toward the door, then stopped. Whatever happens next, he said without turning, know this. I waited. You were never the disappointment. The words came too late. But they came, and that mattered more than I expected. When he opened the study door, the noise from dinner flooded back in. Normal, artificial, fragile. He paused once more. If you're going to do it, he said softly, don't hesitate. You're not going to stop me. He shook his head faintly. No. He understood something now. This wasn't about revenge. It was about ending suspension. I watched him walk back toward the table, his shoulders slightly heavier, his posture less certain. For the first time, he wasn't managing optics. He was bracing. I remained in the study for another minute. Breathing, steady. The certified copy was still in my coat pocket. Untouched. But now he knew. And that changed the power dynamic. Because exposure isn't just about revelation. It's about removing the illusion of control. And Harold had just realized. Control was no longer his. I knew someone had been standing outside the study door. I hadn't seen her. But when I stepped into the hallway, the air felt recently disturbed, like a room someone had just left in a hurry. Clarissa was back at the table. Too still, her fingers wrapped tightly around her water glass. Her smile practiced, her eyes not. She didn't look at me when I returned to the dining room. She looked at our father, and he didn't look at her. That was new. Dinner resumed with a strained normalcy. My mother was speaking too brightly about nursery colors. Soft sage, she said, neutral, calming. Someone laughed. Someone else refilled wine, but the rhythm was off. Harold wasn't participating, he was quiet. Watching, and Clarissa noticed. She always noticed shifts in attention. She had grown up calibrated to it. Halfway through dessert, the catered cheesecake, not my pie, Clarissa stood. I need some air, she announced softly. She walked toward the hallway. Toward the study. Toward where she had been standing minutes earlier. I followed a few seconds later, not dramatically, not urgently, just enough. She was near the window at the end of the corridor. Arms folded tightly across her chest. You went to the county office. It wasn't a question. So she had heard. Yes. Her throat moved as she swallowed. I might. You can't. That came fast, reflexive. Why? Because this isn't just about you. There it was. I tilted my head slightly. When has it ever been about me? She flinched. Don't do that. Do what? That quiet thing. I'm not above it. I just don't shout. Silence stretched between us. She shifted her weight uncomfortably. She asked. The truth. Her face tightened. He told you. He confirmed. Her breathing changed. Faster. Controlled. What exactly do you think you're going to accomplish? She demanded, but her voice lacked conviction. Clarity. For who? For me? She shook her head. This could destroy everything. Everything built on what? Regina. No. I interrupted gently. Let's say it plainly. She looked at me, startled by the steadiness in my voice. Our father signed an acknowledgement nearly a year after I was born. There was a previous claim withdrawn. That's public record. She stared at me as if I'd spoken a foreign language. That doesn't mean. It means something. Her eyes darted toward the dining room. Toward our mother. She'll fall apart. She's been falling apart quietly for years. That's not fair. What part? That she carried guilt, or that she transferred it. Clarissa went very still, for the first time in our lives. She didn't have an immediate rebuttal. You're misinterpreting things, she tried. I'm reading documents. That's cold. Facts usually are. Her voice dropped. Why now? Because something in me finally decided not to be smaller anymore. But I didn't say that aloud. Because I was told there's no room for disappointments. I replied instead. And I'm tired of carrying a title that was never legally mine. That hit her harder than I expected. She blinked, twice. You're saying Mom projected. I'm saying she had reasons. Clarissa pressed her palm against her forehead. You're going to ruin my pregnancy announcement. That was the first honest thing she'd said. Not emotional damage. Her announcement. I haven't done anything, I reminded her. Yet. She stepped closer. Lowered her voice. If you read something out there tonight, the family won't just look at Mom differently. They'll look at all of us differently. It should frighten you too. It doesn't. That surprised her. How can it not? Because I've already lived without approval. That landed quietly. She stared at me for a long moment. You really think Mom treated you differently because of that? Do you have another explanation? Silence. Then something unexpected. I always thought you were stronger, she admitted softly. I blinked. That's what she said. That you didn't need as much. There it was, the narrative. I was independent. Less sensitive. Therefore less deserving. She said I was fragile. Clarissa continued quietly. That I needed protection. And you believed her. I was a kid. So was I. Her composure cracked slightly. You think I wanted you pushed aside. I think you benefited from it. She winced. That's not the same. No. I agreed isn't. The hallway felt smaller now. Tighter, like the walls were leaning in to hear. If you expose this, she whispered, Dad will leave. That's between him and Mom. And what about the baby? What about her? She'll grow up in a broken family. I held her gaze. She'll grow up in a truthful one. That's idealistic. No, I said calmly. It's realistic. We stood there for a long moment, two sisters shaped by the same house but not the same love. You always do this, she said quietly. Do what? You stay calm? It helps. It makes it harder to fight you. I'm not fighting. She studied me, carefully, as if seeing a version she hadn't before. I admitted. For years? And now I'm clear. That word unsettled her more than anything else. Anger could be dismissed, clarity could not. From the dining room my mother called her name, Clarissa. Her voice carried a note of impatience. Clarissa glanced toward it, then back at me. If you're gonna do something, she said quietly, don't blindside her. I won't. That was true. You won't. No. Her brows drew together. I'll speak plainly. She searched my face, trying to predict, trying to regain control, but she couldn't. Because this wasn't impulsive, this wasn't emotional eruption, this was measured. And she knew it. When she walked back toward the table, her posture had changed. Less glowing. More guarded. The golden child had heard the floor shift beneath her. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure where it would crack next. My mother had always been the architect of the room. She decided where people sat, what stories were told, which version of events survived. Tonight, for the first time in decades, she felt the structure tilt. I saw it in the way her eyes followed me after Clarissa returned from the hallway. Too sharp, too alert, not composed anymore. Calculating dinner was nearly over when she stood abruptly. "Regina," she said evenly, "help me in the kitchen." Not a request. A summons. I followed her. The door swung shut. The noise from the dining room dulled instantly. Her back was to me as she gripped the edge of the counter. When she turned, the mask was gone. "What did you show your father?" Straight to it, no politeness. "Nothing," I replied calmly. "What did you tell him?" "The truth." Her eyes narrowed. "You went digging." "I requested my own birth record." I almost smiled at that. I had every legal right. That word unsettled her. Legal. Official. Documented. She stepped closer. "You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand more than you think." Her breathing had changed. Faster now. "You think a piece of paper makes you powerful." "No. It makes me informed." She laughed once. Short. Sharp. "You always wanted attention." "Reduce. Reframe. Invalidate." I wanted answers. I corrected. "You were loved." "No," I said gently. "I was managed." That landed. She went very still. "You have no idea what I sacrificed," she whispered. "For who?" "For this family. For the image," I replied. Her jaw tightened. "You are about to destroy your father." He signed voluntarily. He signed because I begged him. There it was, the admission. Not dramatic, not shouted, just slipped out in panic. "You begged him to stay?" I asked quietly. "Yes." "Why?" Her silence stretched too long. Because she knew the real answer. Not for love, for reputation, for stability, for control. "I was young," she said finally. "I made a mistake." Her eyes flashed. "I never blamed you." "You didn't have to." Silence. Heavy. Breathing space tight. "You were difficult," she insisted weakly. "I was observant." "You were cold." "I was cautious." "You were never grateful." "For what?" I asked softly. That broke something. She slammed her hand against the counter. "I protected you." "From what?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "From the truth." The irony almost hurt. "I found it anyway." She stepped closer again. Her voice turned low. Threatening. "If you expose this tonight, you will regret it." "Why?" "Because once people know, they will ask questions." "They already are." "You think your biological father will want you." There it was. The final weapon. Abandonment fear. She watched my face carefully, waiting for damage. "But something had changed in me." "That's not yours to decide," I replied. Her shoulders fell slightly. For the first time, she looked tired. Not powerful, just cornered. "You don't understand," she murmured. "If Harold leaves, I lose everything. The house, the status. Everything built on presentation. And if I stay silent," I said quietly, "I lose myself." That landed deeper than anything else. She stared at me. Really stared. Maybe for the first time in years. "You're not gonna back down," she said. "No." Her lips trembled. Not from emotion. From lack of control. "You've always been ungrateful. And you've always been afraid." That was the first sharp thing I'd said all night. And it hit. Sharply. "Afraid of what?" she demanded. "Being seen." Silence. Absolute. Outside someone laughed too loudly. Dinner pretending to be intact. Inside the kitchen, the gatekeeper was losing the gate. "You will not embarrass me," she whispered. "I'm not embarrassing you. I'm reading what you signed into existence." Her eyes widened. "How do you know that?" "Because it's certified." That word again. Stamped. Filed. Final. She stepped back as if physically pushed. "You wouldn't." "I haven't yet." "But you will." "No," I corrected gently. "I won't explode. I will clarify." That frightened her more. Because clarification removes narrative control, and narrative was her power. Think about your sister, she said weakly. I am. Think about the baby I am. And you still choose this. I choose truth. She stared at me, and for a split second, I saw fear. Real fear. Not of exposure, but of irrelevance. If truth entered the room, she would no longer be the gatekeeper. The story would not belong to her anymore. And that terrified her. Regina, she said quietly, a different tone now, almost pleading. Please? It was the first time in my life she had ever said that word to me, please. But it wasn't about love. It was about control slipping. I held her gaze. I'm not trying to destroy you, I said. I'm trying to stop being destroyed. That ended it, she knew. She felt it. The shift had already happened. And once power leaves your hands, it doesn't return just because you panic. Outside the kitchen door, dinner was waiting. But inside, the gatekeeper had realized the gate no longer belonged to her. No one noticed when I walked back into the dining room. That was the irony. For 32 years I had mastered invisibility. Tonight, I was using it. The cheesecake plates were half empty, wine glasses refilled. Conversation cautious. Harold avoided looking at Diane. Clarissa avoided looking at me. Diane watched everyone, still guarding, still calculating. I didn't stand at the head of the table. I didn't raise my voice. I simply placed the certified envelope beside my father's plate. The room quieted without being asked. It's strange how silence spreads faster than sound. What is that? Aunt Margaret asked softly. I looked at my mother, then at the empty space where my chair should have been. You said there's no room for disappointments. I began calmly. Immediately. We are not doing this? I agree, I said gently. We're not doing drama? That unsettled her more than resistance would have. I opened the envelope. Carefully, deliberately. The embossed county seal caught the light. Stamp. Official. I requested a certified copy of my original birth filing, I said. Murmurs. Diane stood up. Regina, sit down. I don't have a seat. That landed, sharp, controlled. Harold closed his eyes briefly. He knew what was coming. I didn't read the entire document. Just one line, one sentence. Original birth filing dated March 3rd. I read evenly, father not listed. Gasps. But I continued before emotion could take over the room. Amendment filed 11 months later. Voluntary acknowledgement of paternity signed by Harold Seaton. I let that sit. Then the final line. The record also states, previous paternity claim withdrawn by maternal affidavit prior to amendment. The room went still. Not noisy still, frozen still. 23 relatives recalculating everything they thought they knew. Diane's face drained. Clarissa looked between our parents. Harold stared at the table. I folded the document back down. I am not the disappointment, I said quietly. I was the correction. No shouting. Just fact. Aunt Barbara spoke first. Deanne, what does that mean? Diane laughed. Too quickly. It means nothing. It's paperwork. Paperwork doesn't withdraw itself, I replied softly. Harold finally stood. Nuff. His voice was not loud, but it carried. It means I signed knowing there had been someone else. The room shifted again. That was not part of Diane's script. Harold. I suspected, he said, not looking at her. And I chose not to ask. There it was. Cowardice spoken aloud. Clarissa whispered, Mom. Diane's composure fractured. She insisted. It was, I said. Until you removed my seat. That line cut deeper than anger would have. Silence again. Heavy. Unavoidable. You've humiliated me, Diane breathed. I looked at her calmly. No. You humiliated yourself 32 years ago. No one defended her. That was the loudest shift of all. For decades, she controlled narrative. Tonight, facts replaced narrative. Harold stepped away from the table. I need air, he said quietly. Clarissa began crying, not loudly, confused, shaken. This can't be happening. But it already had. Aunt Margaret looked at me with something like pride. Not for revenge. For restraint. Because I had done it without cruelty. Without spectacle. Without chaos. Just documentation. Diane turned to the table desperately. You all know me, she said. You know what kind of mother I am. The room did not respond immediately. That delay, that hesitation, was the real collapse because once people pause, control weakens. "I never hated you," she said suddenly to me. "I just couldn't separate me from your guilt." The accuracy stunned her into silence. I slid the document back into the envelope. "I didn't read this to hurt you," I said calmly. "I read it so I could stop carrying what wasn't mine." The quiet after that felt different, not explosive, settled, irreversible. Dinner was technically still happening. But no one reached for their plates. No one laughed. The house that had always run on presentation now ran on truth, and truth does not need volume. It only needs confirmation. I walked toward the hallway. Not running, not dramatic, just steady. Behind me, I heard Harold say something I had never heard in that house before. Should have told her, should have. Past tense, too late. But real. And that, more than the document, ended the dinner. The morning after Thanksgiving, the house was quiet. Not peaceful. Hollow. I hadn't stayed the night. I had driven home after the dinner ended, if it could still be called dinner. By 8:12 a.m., my phone buzzed. A message from Aunt Margaret. He left. No punctuation, no explanation. Harold had moved out before sunrise. At 10:04 another message. This time from a number I didn't recognize. "Regina, this is your father. We need to talk." Not dad, not apology, just need. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I opened my laptop. I searched something simple. Voluntary acknowledgement of paternity, legal implications, asset rights. When a man signs acknowledgement, he assumes full legal responsibility, child support, inheritance, custodial presumption. But what interested me wasn't the responsibility, it was the timing. He signed 11 months after I was born. Meaning during those 11 months, there had been uncertainty, and uncertainty has consequences, especially when property taxes and marital assets are involved. At noon, Harold called. I answered. His voice sounded thinner. "Your mother hired an attorney." I assumed she would. "She's claiming emotional coercion." "Off what?" I almost smiled. "With certified public record. She says you're misinterpreting." "I'm not." Silence. Then something different in his tone. I pulled the old tax files. That caught my attention. "For what?" Curiosity. He paused. "There were amendments." "To what?" "To dependent declarations." I leaned back slowly. For the first 10 months after I was born, he hadn't claimed me as a dependent, not on taxes, not on benefits, then suddenly filed amended returns, backdated, recalculated. The same month he signed acknowledgement. Paperwork alignment, not emotional decision, administrative correction. "That's not illegal," I said calmly. "Yes." He exhaled slowly. "I never noticed the pattern. But now you do. Less." This wasn't revenge. This was documentation surfacing. Once someone starts reviewing paper, they rarely stop. By afternoon, Aunt Margaret called. "Deanne is panicking." "About what?" "She's calling relatives, saying you're unstable." Predictable. When narrative control fails, Margaret said quietly, they escalate. Harold hired a forensic accountant. That surprised me. For divorce. Yes. Now that mattered. Because in long marriages, asset division triggers review, review triggers discovery, and discovery doesn't care about comfort. That evening, Harold came to my apartment. He looked older than he had 24 hours earlier, not defeated. "Awake. I found something else," he said. He placed a folder on my kitchen table. Mortgage refinancing documents. Year 2001. I was 8. Refinance reason listed as educational planning. Clarissa's private school tuition started that year. "Your name isn't on any beneficiary paperwork," he said quietly. "I didn't expect it to be. But the trust was created before I signed your acknowledgement." That shifted something. Meaning Diane structured assets assuming I might leave. Protection planning, positioning, not emotional reaction, strategic. "Sure," I murmured. "Yes," and I ignored it. He looked at me differently now. Not distant. Not neutral. "This isn't about revenge," he said. "No. It's about correction." "Yes." We sat in silence. The audit wasn't government, it was personal. Paper revealing pattern. Pattern revealing motive. Motive revealing character. "I don't know who your biological father is," Harold said quietly. "But I know something now." "What?" I protected Diane's image at the cost of your identity. That was the first fully formed truth he had ever spoken. And once truth begins. 2 days later, Diane sent me an email, subject cease and desist. Her attorney claimed defamation risk. The document attached was carefully worded, allegations of reputational harm, requests to refrain from public misrepresentation. I read it twice, then forwarded it to a lawyer I found online. 30-minute consultation. The attorney laughed softly. She can't cease and desist a certified public record, he said, especially one you simply read aloud. What about family defamation claims? Truth is an absolute defense. That was the moment I understood something. This was no longer emotional territory. It was structural. Diane had always controlled rooms, but she could not control filings. She could not control stamped records. And she definitely could not control financial audits triggered by divorce. When structures are built on concealment, audit trails don't destroy them, they reveal them. That night I sat alone at my kitchen table, not shaking, not angry, just steady. I hadn't screamed, I hadn't retaliated, I hadn't exposed more than necessary, but by simply introducing documentation, the system began correcting itself. Harold reviewing tax files, forensic accountant reviewing assets, attorney reviewing timeline, Diane scrambling to reframe. The explosion had been controlled. Now, the consequences were automatic, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting, I was watching truth do the work. The first thing Diane lost wasn't money, it was access, not to bank accounts, to people. The morning Harold filed. The family group chat went silent for nearly an hour. No memes, no good morning, no passive-aggressive holiday leftovers, just absence. Then, slowly, names began to appear. Aunt Barbara, I'm sorry for what I believed. Uncle Thomas, Regina, can we talk? Cousins who had called me difficult for years suddenly remembered my birthday, not because they became kinder overnight, but because Diane's version of me had stopped being useful. When the narrative collapses, loyalty redistributes. It's not moral, it's gravitational. Harold texted me the same afternoon. Temporary orders in place. Don't worry, I stared at the message. Don't worry was not a phrase I associated with him. I called him. What does that mean? I asked. It means Diane can't move large sums right now, he said quietly. The attorneys filed standard restraining language. No unusual transfers. Is that normal? I asked. Yes. He paused. She tried to withdraw from the joint account this morning, and her attorney told her to stop. That was the first redistribution, not poetic, not dramatic, just friction. For years, Diane had moved through life like doors opened automatically. Now, paperwork slowed her down, and she didn't know how to live inside a system that didn't bend for her. 2 days later, Clarissa came to my apartment. She didn't text first. She didn't call, she just appeared. Her eyes were swollen, her hair pulled back badly, like she had stopped caring about appearance for the first time in her life. She stood in my doorway and looked around as if she'd never noticed I lived like a person, not a supporting character. Hi, she said quietly. I didn't invite her in immediately. Not to punish her, to set the tone. What do you want, Clarissa? Her mouth trembled. I don't know who I'm supposed to talk to. That was honest. A golden child without a script feels like that. I stepped aside and let her in. She sat on my couch like she was afraid of leaving fingerprints. I didn't think Mom could do this, she whispered. Do what? Build everything around a lie. I didn't respond. I let the silence do its work, because Clarissa had spent her whole life being rescued from silence. Now she needed to sit in it. She says you planned this? Clarissa said. She says you wanted to destroy the family. I nodded slowly. And do you believe her? Clarissa looked down at her hands. I don't know what I believe. Try something simple, I said gently. Do you remember when Mom got sick? Her throat tightened. Yes. Do you remember who stopped their life to take care of her? Clarissa's eyes filled. Did anyone ever thank me? She shook her head. No. Did anyone ever ask what it cost me? No. That's redistribution, I said softly. Not money. Reality. Clarissa stared at me. For the first time, she looked smaller than her privilege. I thought you didn't mind, she whispered. I exhaled slowly. That's what Mom taught you to believe. She looked like she might argue. Then didn't. Because she couldn't, that evening. Diane called me. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. Her voice was tight, controlled, rage dressed as composure. Regina. You've made your point. Now stop. This is harming Clarissa's pregnancy. You want to punish me, fine. But don't punish her. I listened to it once. Then deleted it. Not out of cruelty. Out of clarity. Because that was the old gatekeeping again. Reframe everything as Clarissa's well-being so no one can challenge it. A trap wrapped in innocence. I wasn't stepping into it. Aunt Margaret called me the next day. She tried to host a family meeting. She said, "Who showed up?" A pause. Not many. That made my chest tighten, not from joy, from disbelief. Diane had always been the sun people orbited. Now they weren't. Your mother is realizing something, Aunt Margaret added. What? That love that depends on control isn't love. That sounded like philosophy. But what it really meant was simple. Her phone calls weren't working. Her tears weren't working. Her threats weren't working. And without those tools, she didn't know how to stand. Harold came by again, briefly, just to drop a document envelope. He said, not meeting my eyes. What? Beneficiary. He cleared his throat. My life insurance. Retirement. I listed you. I stared at him. Not because I wanted his money, but because it was the first time he had ever written my importance into a system. Not a compliment. A legal designation. A correction. You didn't have to, I said quietly. Yes, he replied. I did. He left before the moment could get emotional. That was his style. But the act mattered. Because redistribution isn't always taking from someone. Sometimes it's finally giving what should have existed all along. That night I sat alone at my table. 4 chairs. All mine, no gatekeeper assigning seats. I thought about Diane. How she had used disappointment like a stamp. Not because I deserved it, but because she needed a container for her shame. Now that container was gone, and shame was returning to its owner. It wasn't revenge, it was gravity. It was consequence. It was redistribution. Not of wealth, of truth, of support, of who people believed. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't begging for a place at their table. I was building my own. The message had been sitting unopened for 3 days. Not because I was afraid. Not entirely. Because I didn't want urgency to decide for me. For most of my life I had reacted. To my mother's moods. To my father's silence. This time, I wanted to choose. The message preview read, Hello Regina. I was recently informed there may be a connection between us. Connection. Not claim, not accusation. Connection. That word alone told me something about the man who sent it. I opened it slowly. He had kept it simple. No dramatic language. No instant affection. No defensive tone. He wrote that he had been told of a possible paternity question from decades ago. That he had not known. That if I wished to verify anything, he would cooperate fully. He included his phone number, and one line at the end. If you prefer, no contact, no pressure, no guilt, no ownership. I stared at that sentence longer than the rest. Respect. It felt unfamiliar. I called Aunt Margaret. I opened it. I said, and. He's calm. That's good. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. You're not supposed to feel anything yet, she said gently. You're allowed to just gather information. Information, not destiny. That helped. For weeks, this story had been about correction. Records corrected. Narratives corrected. Assets corrected now. Identity. But identity doesn't explode. It unfolds. I made tea. Sat at my table. Looked at the 4 chairs again. This time I pulled one out and sat deliberately. Not because someone assigned it. Because I chose it. I picked up my phone. Typed E. I'm willing to verify through formal testing first. I stared at the message. Not emotional, not dramatic, just procedural. Then I pressed send. The reply came 20 minutes later. Of course. I'll arrange testing at a certified lab. You can choose location, certified. The word almost made me smile. This entire transformation had been built on documentation. Truth without theatrics. He didn't ask to meet. He didn't call me daughter. He didn't overstep. That mattered more than I expected. That evening Harold called. I heard you responded. Wes. He was quiet for a moment. I'm glad. That surprised me. You are. Yes. Why? Because if he is your father, you deserve someone who didn't choose comfort over you. That was the most honest sentence he had ever spoken to me. I didn't know what to say to it. So I said the only thing that was true, even if I wasn't yours biologically. Yes. He replied immediately. I know. No defensiveness. No excuses. Just acknowledgement. That was enough. 2 days later, Diane emailed again. Subject, please. Not legal this time, personal. She wrote that meeting him would complicate things. That it would invite outsiders into family matters. That some truths were better left private. I read it once, then closed it. For 32 years, privacy had meant concealment. Silence had meant protection for everyone except me. No more. This choice wasn't about punishing her. It was about refusing to shrink. The lab appointment was scheduled for Tuesday. Neutral facility. Chain of custody protocol. No emotional theatrics, just data. As I filled out the intake form, I noticed something. Under father's name, it allowed blank space. Optional. Not assumed. That simple detail felt strangely liberating. For the first time, the system didn't require me to pretend certainty. It allowed question. And question is not weakness, it's honesty. After the swab, I sat in my car for a long time, not crying, not shaking, just breathing. Whatever the result would be, it wouldn't define me. That realization surprised me. For months, I thought the answer would complete something. But sitting there, I understood something deeper. The certified birth record had corrected history. The audit trail had corrected structure. But this was about curiosity, not validation. I wasn't looking for a replacement father. I wasn't looking for rescue. I was looking for accuracy. And accuracy doesn't demand emotion, it demands patience. When I got home, I moved one chair from my table to the balcony. I don't know why. Maybe habit. But I left it there, not for someone else, for possibility. That night I slept deeply. Not because everything was resolved, but because I had chosen, not reacted, not obeyed, not rebelled, chosen. The dinner that undid everything hadn't destroyed my life. It had removed illusion. And without illusion, choice becomes visible. Whatever the results say, I will read them calmly. And for the first time in my life, I will not be waiting for permission. The results arrived on a Thursday morning. No dramatic envelope. No red stamp. Just a secure portal notification from the lab. I opened it at my kitchen table. Alone. Calm. Probability of paternity 99.998%. James Martin. Confirmed. I read the number twice. Not because I doubted it. Because I wanted to feel something seismic. Something cinematic. But what I felt instead was alignment. Not joy. Not devastation. Just correction. A column that had been blank. Now filled. He called that afternoon. Not immediately after seeing the results. He waited. That mattered. Regina, he said gently. Yes. I don't know what role you want me to have. Not daughter. Not ownership. Not apology rehearsed. Just recognition of space. I don't know either. I answered honestly. I wasn't told about you, he said quietly. I know. I stopped him. Because I didn't need hypothetical rewrites. What mattered was now. We agreed to meet. Public calf neutral ground. No family drama. No emotional spectacle. Just two adults sharing verified data. Before the meeting, Harold came by one last time. The divorce paperwork was moving forward. Assets divided according to law. No dramatic courtroom battle. Appraisals. Distribution. I'm selling the house, he said. That surprised me. You don't have to. I don't want it. He looked around my apartment, small, honest. Funny thing, he said quietly. I protected a structure for decades. Turns out, it wasn't worth protecting. That was the closest he would ever come to full confession. I signed beneficiary updates permanently, he added. I know. I'm not trying to buy forgiveness. I know. He nodded. The ledger wasn't emotional anymore. It was administrative. He had corrected what he could. But real. The cafe meeting was unremarkable, which is exactly why it mattered. James Martin looked older than his photos. Kind eyes. Nervous hands. He didn't try to hug me, didn't overstep. He brought a folder. Inside were old employment records, a photograph from the office in 1992, and a letter he had written but never sent to my mother after she suddenly stopped responding. "I thought she chose her marriage," he said quietly. "She chose silence." I replied. He nodded. We talked for 2 hours about architecture, about books, about nothing dramatic. There was no instant bond. No swelling music moment, just possibility. When we stood to leave, he said something simple. "I won't push. But I'm here." That was enough. Diane sent one final message a week later. Short. "Are you satisfied?" I stared at it for a long time, then I typed back. "I'm steady." That was the truth. Not satisfied. Not triumphant. Steady. Clarissa visited with the baby. She placed little Ruth in my arms awkwardly. "You don't have to forgive Mom," she said quietly. "I'm not focused on forgiveness." Then what? Balance. She didn't understand fully, but she would. Someday the house sold 3 months later, divided, accounts separated, trusts updated, no scandal headline, no public humiliation campaign, just paperwork stamped, filed, closed, the same way this began, with documentation. One evening, I set my table for 4, not because I needed 4 people, because I liked the symmetry. I sat in one chair, left the others open, not empty, open. The ledger of my life had once been written by someone else. Columns labeled, difficult, disappointment, less. Now, the columns were mine, resilient. Documented, chosen. I wasn't the correction, I was the constant. The dinner that ended everything had not destroyed my family. It revealed the accounting error at its center, and once acknowledged, the numbers adjusted naturally. No shouting, no spectacle, just balance. And for the first time in 33 years, my seat didn't have to be assigned. I placed it myself.